Imagine for a couple seconds that you're looking at the side profile of your block, just like this pink one for the pumpkins. The best kind of marks for lino cut that can withstand pressure of printing. So you don't want to carve in such a way where, say, if you're going to ink this area, with pressure this will kind of mushroom down. So you don't want to cut under the marks you want to leave to ink. And same thing, you don't necessarily even want it to be completely straight down. Although I've done this for several of my prints, and depending on the material, sometimes it can withstand this, especially for hand printing at home. But over time, working on a press, even this will start to almost make like a mushroom cap over time at a small level. The best kind of like marks you can make, say imagine this is where the ink is going to go, is kind of almost like a rhombus, like a pyramid or plateau. And this will give it more strength when pressure is applied. So our goal is typically to carve in such a way that we don't undercut our marks. One kind of gouge is called the V-gouge, and this is because of the shape of the blade. It's almost shaped like a V, and so when you carve, it tends to carve out in the shape of a V. So this is an example of using the India ink to paint onto a block so that you can see where you're carving. So this is an example of what kind of marks the V-gouge makes. When you carve, you always want to carve away from yourself and hold down your block behind where you're going to be carving with a gouge. The direction of your force will be going this way. You want to start very like a little bit up, and as soon as you capture some of that, you want to kind of level out flat. So I would encourage you on one side of your block to test out making marks. Try out some flat, straight lines. See if you can go back into a line and change the width of the line as you carve. The most important thing though, so you don't want to carve like this. Even though it makes some cool like jagged edges, typically this is a bad cutting form because it will make your tool become dull faster by not kind of using it in the way it was designed for. You can, if you want to make a jagged mark, cut lots of straight lines or curved lines, but don't rock your tool side to side. For making curves, sometimes I leave it out in such a way where I'm able to spin the block by I might push straight and turn the block, or some combination of the both, of turning the block with my other hand, always making sure that my hand is behind where I'm carving. So like if I wanted to go back over. And of course, if you have lines from an old design that you want to, once you've taken a proof, you feel like this bumpy area is a little awkward, you want to smooth that out, you can go back into your lines you've already carved and kind of recarve into them to either widen them or to make them swell and taper in a new way. And so when you exit a mark, you just kind of want to lower. So once you start carving, you don't want to keep going at this steep angle. You'll level off. And then when you want to lift up, you can either stop abruptly, or you can even like kind of flick up, although I have heard that this also wears down a blade. But sometimes that'll leave more of a tapered end of a mark. So I would say practice making lots of small marks And of course there are U-Gouges, in which the tip is shaped like a U, and this tends to make more rounded marks. And in the side of the block, if you were able to take a cross section, it would kind of scoop out rounded marks into the block. So a U-gouge, sometimes depending on the size of it, makes a larger, wider mark than a V-gouge. I like V-gouges a lot because you can use that to outline or make thin, like cross-hatching, but something you can use for a more stylized mark or for clearing out larger shapes is the U-gouge. So if I make like little dots, these make little round marks. So just like the other gouge, I'm going down and kind of lifting and leveling it out. So these of course can also make straight marks. You also always want to maybe err on the side of carving less and then going back into the same mark if you want to make it wider, rather than trying to get a mark all the way at the same time. Once you carve a mark, it is difficult to repair. If you have a PVA glue, sometimes you can carve something and glue it back in, or carve all the way to the base of the linoleum and insert something. But I have found over the years that no matter how much I try, you can always tell where you've patched it. Sometimes in wood carvings it's a little easier with wood putty, and then you can kind of carve back in a fake grain to kind of match up. But for linoleum, I've always found it hard to hide. So sometimes what I do is just kind of make it work with my design, or start over with a new block of linoleum. Between the V-gouge and the U-gouge, I usually use those for most of my work, but other people also make use of knives, which you can use a little bit differently. If I'm just using the V and U-gouges for shapes, for example, I'm drawing a triangle and maybe a circle shape and maybe a cylinder. And maybe I'll do a little shadow. Okay. The direction you make your marks will affect how your image is read. So if you want to, as a beginner, you can just go ahead and outline shapes just to practice getting these as just practice carving. And so something like this, I might go back and see how that kind of juts out a little bit. I'll return to that mark and try to push it out to meet the edge of that mark a little bit. But it takes a little bit of practice. Or I'll start from this mark. And usually, if I'm trying to carve out this whole shape, I'll try to get enough width on the outline around the block. Maybe I'll learn to carve this out too. So that it'll be easier if I have a U-gouge to come in and very carefully clear it out. So go slow to start. Remember, start at a higher angle and then level off so that you don't just keep gouging in deeper. But you want to gouge deep enough where if you want this to be a clean, clear, crisp shape, you don't have it. If you want the lines and the direction of this to show, don't carve very deep. And maybe space your carved marks out over there. And of course, you don't have to carve in parallel shapes. And keep in mind the direction you carve sometimes will show up when you print. And so you might want to keep in mind, say if you have a form like a cylinder, you might want your marks to follow the curve of something like a form like that. So it's great practice to try to carve lines, straight lines, curves, and then I don't want it to hit the circle, so I'll just stop there. So you can carve directly into the block without any drawing. And I like doing this, like going to figure drawing sessions, is just carving right in. Remember, this is a reductive process. So you're removing material that will end up being the paper color. Now, if you know you're going to be printing with white ink onto black paper, less conventional, and black paper is usually more expensive, then you might actually kind of carve like you usually draw. But for the most part, most paper, the way most people print wood blocks is that you'll ink this up a solid, say dark color, or just a solid color. There we go. So here I am turning my block so that when I carve into this, I usually hold it with the base of the handle in my palm and maybe my fingers like this. Something that's important is I often carve with, so when you carve, you're not just using like all your small muscles. You want to use like the power coming from your elbow, from your shoulder, in order to do this. Sometimes I find it easier to carve standing up, but carving sitting down is what I usually do, but sometimes I go back and forth between the two. So as you can see, going around the circle, I am like carving a little bit. I'm not trying to get the whole line all at once. And so I've turned this as I went around. Of course, it's not perfect. And you can go back in to refine it. So I'll clear this out. So when you're clearing out a big shape, you can either just kind of keep carving and overlapping with the last line, or if you want to, if you don't want to accidentally carve very deep, if you like say want the chatter in between, you can space out your lines. Again, you don't have to go in like parallel lines like this. You're free to, if you wanted to follow the curve like a spiral, it's a little harder. And if you want to end up clearing this out, this might be the easiest way to go. Now, once you get to a point where you might have a lot of smaller lines like this, there are some gouges that doesn't come in all the kits, but if you have it, this is what it's used for. It's like a square gouge, so it's not really a exact, it's kind of like a giant U, but like squared off a little bit. And this is used for clearing larger areas. So this is perfect for going in, and maybe if you don't want the chatter, this one that I have is definitely not sharp, so it's not catching at all. So if you suspect that your tools are dull by any reason, sometimes it's the replacement blades aren't very super expensive, or you could try to sharpen them, which I will show in another video. as you're using either new tools, or if your tools get dark, sometimes you might find that your tool like skips a lot. Like it jumps as you're carving. And so you might carve slightly deeper, or you might heat up the block slightly with a hairdryer. But sometimes heating up the hairdryer, your nib is just not working out. Sometimes that won't even help. So if you have a tool like that and you can't get another one, just go slow and steady. And you can carve in curves, but it just might take a little bit of practice. Or carving maybe in other directions first and then smoothing back over with the direction you want it to go. And of course I still have that little nib, or there's like a little slip that I did. I can like go back to here and just try to meet up with it closer and try to hide that. But sometimes it's better to leave it alone before it like completely changes the character.